Hey guys, welcome back. It's video 11 in our Hidden Art of Homemaking series. All right guys, welcome back. I am so excited for this series, guys. It is so much fun. I am having a blast. This is video 11. This is going to be chapter 12 on clothing. We are going through The Hidden Art of Homemaking by Edith Schaefer, written in 71, like 50 years ago, guys. And it is all about homemaking. We're going chapter by chapter. If you have missed any of the videos in this series, there's one for every single chapter, and yeah, they're all linked below. In the description of this video, you can find the playlist where you can find the entire collection of videos, and this is such a good series, guys. So I do recommend, I do encourage you to get online, find this book and purchase it for yourself, because you're going to want to reference it in the future many times over. Again, I call it my highlighter book. I literally have every single chapter highlighted. It's a beautiful book, so I do encourage you to go ahead and purchase your own copy, and it is available on Amazon and I'm sure other places as well. If you haven't already, I do encourage you to subscribe, like, comment, and share the videos with others and in social media groups so that others can find them as well. And there are also, just so you know, because we are nearing the end of this book, we have about 3 chapters left. There are other playlists on my channel for other books related to homemaking and homeschooling and parenting and being a mom. If you want to check those out as well, where I have done the exact same thing I'm doing here, going chapter by chapter and sharing with you guys my commentary and comments as we go through the book together. All right, this chapter is chapter 12. It is on clothing, and in comparison to some of the other chapters, these last several chapters are fairly short. So this chapter is not terribly long. It is about clothing, and I was really curious, I guess, where she was going to go with this. Is she going with like making clothes or what we should wear as Christians? I didn't really know, so I was interested to see where she was going to go. So let's get started. All right, right off the bat, she kind of addresses what my questions were when I saw the title of this chapter. And she says, you know, does it matter how we dress? Is it a sign of spirituality to be dowdy? Not gonna lie, I had to look up that word because I was going, what? And just for those who also don't know, it means unfashionable. So is it a sign of spirituality to be unfashionable? Are certain clothes and styles positively wrong? And are others right? She talks a little bit just about what is appropriate clothing, colors, styles, modesty, not modesty, and she goes into a little bit of I guess not really a history, but kind of a description of kinds of clothing that you may see in other parts of the world or even in our country as well. She talks about certain lengths of dress are not considered Christian. Some people say that buttons brings pride. Some people say that trousers for women is not Christian, but in other parts of the world, women wear trousers and men wear loose tunics. She talks here a little bit about flowered materials are, some people think, are not spiritual, so they just wear browns, grays, and blacks. I'm sure we can kind of put little cultures or titles to each of these little descriptions, but we don't really need to, because what it all comes down to is everybody dresses differently and for different reasons. Then she says, okay, so others have a standard as, have a standard that a certain period of time is the way to dress. Like you can't be fashionable with your current standard or your current trends and fashions. But they don't consider that if they were living in that time frame, dressing like that, they would actually be fashionable. So it is something to kind of consider. Okay, so she says, God clothed Adam and Eve after the fall with leather, fur, and she says possibly suede. It was the skins of animals that Adam and Eve were clothed with when they left the gorgeous garden. And something she points out here that I've actually really never considered, but she says perhaps they had leopard skin tunics. We don't know how beautiful their skins were. I think it's interesting that she notes that because, you know, in today's world, I feel like animal print, leopard skin or snake skin or whatever, is not really considered bad, but it's definitely not considered like classy, okay? It's not like, oh, you look super classy in that outfit, right? So I do think that's interesting to note. She says, his children are not to worry about their supplies of food, drink, and clothing. To put God first and seek his righteousness, we should notice carefully what Christ actually said. Think of the flowers, the lilies of the field, which do not do any work or to gain anything. Yet they are more beautifully clothed than King Solomon when he was at his height of glory. Therefore, if God can be so beautifully, let's start over. Therefore, if God can so beautifully clothe the flowers of the field, which only last a short time and then are cut down, how much more shall he clothe you, O you of little faith? Have we not all been there where we have thought, how am I going to do this? How am I going to have enough food? How am I going to have enough clothes or the right styles or whatever? And then somebody brings this verse back to us, right? Whether it's a friend or family or Holy Spirit or whatever. And it's true. It is so true. So we need to be trusting God to provide what is needed, she says. It encourages the Christian to pray for his daily needs, to follow the Lord's plan for the use of his life. She says this passage also clearly says something else. It tells us to consider or think about the field full of flowers. Okay. Now she's going to go into some details about different kinds of flowers, and I can't go through this entire chapter word for word. That's why I encourage you to buy it. So I'm going to kind of skip through that, but just know she is going through different kinds of flowers and pointing out different aspects of those kinds of flowers, different colors, different styles, different ways that they are created. And that's basically the general idea that you need to get from that. And she says, wherefore, if God so clothed the grass of the field, clothed the grass like this, God the Creator made the beauty of color, texture, and variety of form of the flowers. Okay, so the flowers have different colors, there are different textures, different styles of flowers, different forms. We were told so elsewhere, but now we are told here that he not only created the flowers, but that we can think of this in relationship to our clothing. We can see the kind of clothing God designs when we look at the flowers. Think of roses, begonias, tulips, hyacinths, water lilies, lilies of the valley, Easter lilies. Think of orchids, poppies, chrysanthemums, wisteria. She goes on and on and on, just all the different kinds. Is there a right pattern for a flower? Is there a right color? Is there a right style, a right variety for flowers? She says God designed the flowers and caused them to continue through the centuries so that we today can have before us examples of his patterns for our clothing. I love that whole thing because it's something you don't think about. Like you just think, oh, God clothed the field with beautiful flowers. He'll clothe us with something as well. And sometimes we forget that we get a little bit hung up on the different styles or the different things. And she goes into a little more detail here, which I was a little concerned and hoping she would cover, and she does, with modesty and different things. But I do like this, that it's kind of that permission, I guess, that things are okay to have in different varieties. But I do think, and I don't think she covers it in this chapter, so I will probably get to it in a few minutes, but I do think that there does need to be some discernment with what we wear. Okay, before we get to that, she says, he is emphasizing that we are to trust him to provide us with the necessary clothing to cover us and keep us warm. It is true, okay, so provider, but he is claiming much more than simple utility, since he says that he who designed the clothing seen on the flowers is the same one who will provide for us. He loves us and considers us more important than the grass and the flowers. We are personalities who will live eternally. We are personal, and so we have the marks of personality, including a capability for creating, appreciating beauty, and creating it. So Yeah, it's just true. It's true. We've talked about this whole book about how much we need to be creating beautiful things and having beautiful things in our lives. And she says, you know, with all of that beauty in your life, why are we worried about looking so drab and so plain all the time? Or I don't even know how you want to phrase it, but I think you probably get the idea. She says a capability for appreciating beauty and creating it. Okay, so she says later, I feel he certainly does not mean that those things are to be ugly. We're not meant to have ugly clothing, ugly houses, ugly and unpalatable food. I think that's true. I think that's true. This is not our home. We know that. We know that our heavenly home is in heaven and that we are visitors here, but that doesn't mean that we're supposed to be ugly and drab and boring, right? So we can still be beautiful and wonderful, because how else are other people going to look at us and say, I want to be a Christian, I want to be like them, if we just look drab and boring all the time, right? So she says, is it not important that a Christian, this is what I was just talking about, a Christian represent in his clothing the one in whose image he is made? Exactly what I was just saying. So now she's going to get into modesty, which I was really hoping she was going to cover, because I have done videos in the past on modesty. I will link them below if you're interested in seeing them as well. But I was curious of where she was going to go with this. And she says, what about willing to go without? None of these things need to be neglected as one thinks of clothing as a creative part of life. Modesty needs to be considered. We must be willing to go without material things, among them the money to buy all that we want in clothing. We do need to share in this area and give to other people too. None of this is negated by realizing that beauty is important, that beauty, artistry, and creativeness can come into the area of clothing. Okay, before I go to the next section, it's so good. We need to be not like, oh, all the beautiful things are for me and I get everything that's beautiful. That is sometimes the way it is flaunted, and every time you see something that's wonderful and beautiful, you have to have it. Okay, so that is taking the desire or the idea that you should have beautiful things to the extreme. Okay, and that is where it becomes a sin, because it's no longer God is providing these wonderful things, but it's now you chasing after it like an envy and a need, and it's no longer a good thing. So it is something that we need to be careful of. Okay, I put a star on this whole next section. Whether we are providing clothing for ourselves, our children, a friend, stranger, the aspect of beauty of considering the flowers should enter in. We who are dressing ourselves and our children, providing for missionaries or friends, making things for orphans or refugees, should consider the flowers, the lilies of the field, or consider it our part as infinite and perfect human beings to be as creative as we have the talent to be. I love this so much, and I'm reminded, sometimes I'll go to like a garage sale or a thrift store and I'll think to myself, why are they even bothering to sell this? It is so worn out, or it is so broken, or it is so trashed that nobody's going to want it. Like, why are they trying to give it to someone else who doesn't have a lot of money, or donate it to a thrift store or whatever, when it's not even worth that? And I think sometimes we get to that point where we think, oh, I get to have the beautiful things for me, but all of my leftovers that are falling apart, we will wear them out until they're no longer usable, and then assume that somebody who is less fortunate would want them because, oh, well, they don't have anything else. And I do not like that at all, but I see that so many times. We have a large family, a lot of kids. We have 7 kids. And many times throughout the years, people would give us bags of clothes, especially when most of my kids were very, very small, and they would give us bags of clothes, and they would just ask, hey, or sometimes they wouldn't ask, they would just give it to me, or they would say, hey, I have a bag of clothes, do you want it? And I would always say yes. But then I would go take it home and I would be so excited, especially if it was hard times when we didn't have a lot of money. And I'd be so excited to sit on the couch and go through all these clothes. And I would be thinking to myself, God has provided, just like he said he would. He's provided all these clothes for the kids. And I would sit down to go through them all. And then I would sit there in disappointment. And as I was looking at them, and piece after piece had holes or stains, visible stains on them. And I was thinking to myself, why did these people even bother to bag these up and keep them to give to me if I'm just going to take them and trash them? And I would take them every single time. I would go through, big trash bags, and I would find maybe 4 or 5 items to keep. The rest of it I would just trash because it wasn't even worth it. It wasn't stuff that even I felt like if I'm going to give it to somebody, I want them to be able to use it, not just feel like, oh, here we are in our trashy clothes, And so I would never pass them on usually. I would just either use what we could or trash what was trash. And I feel like so many times in today's society, especially in today's world where we live today, clothes are so disposable. There are so many clothing. I'll go to the store all the time and I'll find things for $1 and things on clearance or whatever. And there's such an abundance. It's not like in the olden days when we would make an outfit, or not we, but our ancestors would make an outfit and they would go and pick out the fabric. And then that was like their dress for the whole year. And they only had one. We have so many to choose from. Why are we walking around in stained stuff that's super trashed? I get having play clothes, okay? Don't get me wrong. The kids do have play clothes, things that have stains or whatever, but I'm talking about things that were just trashed. And you're thinking, this is to the point that we should just trash it. We don't need to keep this for somebody else. So anyway, that's kind of a little soapbox that I'll get off of now. But she says next is, what about styles? Obviously, there's different styles. Styles change, geographical areas. She points out something so very obvious. We couldn't have standards for clothing. Like we couldn't say everybody has to wear this or this, because there are different ways and lifestyles and climates that we live in. Okay, so it wouldn't make sense to say you have to wear this or you have to wear that, or you can't wear this or you can't wear that, when the climate or the lifestyle that person engages in may require that kind of article of clothing. So she says one could not wear the same clothing in Alaska with snow and ice as you might wear in the heat of India or in a rainy area. To say there is a general right or wrong in the kind of clothing worn is to ignore the fact that one must wear some kind of specific clothing to do certain activities. She goes into more detail on all of those. But she says, but is it wrong to be in fashion, like to be stylish or trendy, to watch fashion change and change one's pattern of clothing? Or is it better to dress as people dressed a century ago, a decade ago, a year ago? What is the standard to go by? I like the question. I prefer, because we are a large family, because we don't have a ton of money all the time, I would prefer, for my own family, I prefer things that are classic and timeless and that can be used in various ways. So like solid tops that I could put with a printed skirt, and then maybe I could throw a jacket or a shawl over it, and different things that you could style in different manners. I prefer that kind of stuff, but some people like super trendy stuff. My sister-in-laws are early 20s, and they are totally in the age, and I was too at that age, for trends. And they are totally in the age for like, we want to have all the fun stuff, the cutesy stuff, and I totally get it. And then it kind of recycles through all of them, and then to my own children fairly quickly, because the trends do change, and they're at a time in their life when that's possible. But as a mom, I feel like I prefer the basics and the classic and the timeless pieces to all of the trends. It seems to me that differences in occupation, climate, personal needs are the first considerations. The importance of fitting in with the people with whom one is in contact. This is especially important if one is a Christian who really wants to communicate with other people. but their dress doesn't follow their culture. Okay, so that sounds a little off, but let's dig into it a little bit and you'll understand. So fitting in, like we should fit in, that sounds like, oh, we should follow the world and we should do what the world says. And that's not where she's going with this. She is saying, she even gives an example, talking about her dad in China, and basically saying that he was a missionary in China. And she says, in China at that time when he was a missionary, they wouldn't even talk or entertain the idea of speaking to someone who was an American or a Westerner or anybody from another part of the world to discuss. And so if they're trying to win people for Christ and they can't even talk to them, to blend into their culture and to say, look, we accept your culture, we want to help you know God, that is a totally different thing. And so she goes into this whole thing about how at that time, it was common for men to have long hair, and it was common for men to have braids, and it was common for men to wear longer tunic type things, which we would probably call a dress. But that is the culture of that area. So they were not dressing that way to be women, as our culture today tells us. They were dressing that way because that was considered masculine and manly in their culture. And that's where she was saying, to fit in so that they could reach these people for Christ, that is what her dad would do also. And her mom would dress in the traditional Chinese attire to fit in with the women. And she talks about how that included her wearing trousers and different kinds of clothing and such. I think sometimes that's where it gets confused. Like, we look at other cultures and we think, oh, they do this, so it's okay. But they are doing it in a way that in their culture is still considered masculine. Like when you look at kilts are considered masculine in their culture. But in America, it does not mean, oh, they're wearing skirts, so we should wear skirts, now we can be girly, okay? And that's where society is going to mislead you. And I'm pretty sure everybody watching this is on the same page, so I won't delve into it too much. But I did want to clear up where she was going with that fitting in phrasing. We need to consider comfort and beauty. Some people have an ability for designing, cutting, sewing, tailoring, fitting, and this is not me. I have tried many times over the years to create and make my own clothing or clothing for my children, and it is just not something I'm very good at. So in fact, I told my husband, if the end of the world came, like if we lost electricity and access to stores, kind of like what happened with COVID, if all of those things were going on, we're just going to have to wear what we got because I am not that great at altering and making my own clothing. I did highlight this phrase, one can be original and yet fit in with the general location and group, the place where God has chosen to put you. I did highlight that. I thought that was a good phrase. Skipping down a little bit, she says, we are not to be dogmatic in rebellion, nor dogmatic in being conservative or straight. The person with long hair should not be snobbish and reject the person with short hair. I've seen this occur in church congregations where girls will have very long hair and maybe my girls have a shorter hair than that and are kind of looked down upon. And I have seen that in church congregations. The person with bare feet should not scorn the person with shoes. Of course, I feel like these things shouldn't even have to be said, but they do. The person without a hat should not segregate himself from the person with a hat. The person with gloves and a cane should not feel superior to the person with a bare hands and a stick. She goes on to a couple more, and it's true. It's true. We sometimes look at others and think, oh, they dress that way because, right? But maybe that's all they have. Maybe that's all they afford. Maybe they were donated clothes like I was talking about, and that's what the people gave them, and that's all they've gotten. But to take what we have and to give it to others, that when it is still usable, is so much better. Finding some sort of communication with the person inside the hair, inside the hat. That's true. The outward appearance often will stop us from reaching people for God. We will often stop ourselves because we'll think, oh, they have you know, these colored hair, or they have this mohawk, or they have this shirt that's showing their tummy, or the short skirt, or whatever. And we will stop ourselves because we see the world and we assume that because they look like the world, they are the world, and they want to be the world, and they don't want to know God, when really maybe the gospel's never even been delivered to them, you know? Okay, so some serious thinking must take place in the area of our basic attitudes, and our judgment of people must be free from superficiality. Yes, absolutely. But if we say that it is right to dress to fit in, we have to know fit in with whom. This is where she talks about her dad and dressing to fit in with the Christian or with the Chinese people so that he could reach them for God. I love that too. Okay, so is your purpose simply to rebel against the stuffiness, or is there some willingness to blend in with the local custom? Blending in this way does not need to be without originality and design. It does not rule out the exercise of taste and your own preference of fabric and textures. If God has taken you to a very poor community to work among the underprivileged of that place, it is important not to flaunt riches in the form of clothing in a way that alienates you. It is not necessary nor helpful as a Christian to dress in a way which stands out like a sore thumb. The Christian should remember wherever he is placed by the Lord that he is not meant to put all of his money on his back. That is very true, and that is something the world will tell us is not true. So there you go. There's coming a day when we shall be dressed by him, as well as living in the mansions he is preparing. It is very important to be willing to sacrifice and patiently to wait for that day. It's also very important to be modest, not to dress in such a way as to be mistaken for a bandit or a thief or a prostitute, not in such a way also to be a temptation to members of the opposite sex. It is still important to remember that we are representing the creator of the universe, and we are dressing for and dressed by the one who tells us that even Solomon in all his glory was not dressed as magnificently as the flowers clothed by him. That sums up this whole chapter, but it just does. So we don't need to be looking to the world on how to dress, nor do we need to be looking towards the so conservatives, so far removed that we can't even have colors and patterns in our clothing. The way that we approach it in our home, which I said there are videos listed below where I go into more detail on that, but basically the way that we approach it in our home is, are you doing that? Are you honoring God in what you're wearing? And are you, by wearing that, is it because you want to fit in? So let me take an example. Let's take the example of holey pants with holes in them, okay? Yes, I get it. My kids wear out their pants too, and those become play jeans, right? Play pants, right? Or we cut them off and make shorts. But do we need to be buying pants with holes in them? Do we need to be buying pants with holes where our body parts are hanging out, where our upper thighs are hanging out, or there's so many holes that it looks like we're barely holding the pants on? Okay, there are extremes to this. The same with a shirt. Does the shirt need to be, have tiny little straps, and it's kind of more of a distraction, and it's more of a sexual thing? Or do we need to have clothing that brings attention to our faces and brings attention to our minds versus our bodies? Are we looking to show off our bodies? So we're not anti-shorts in our house. We're not only wear dresses. There are situations like if we went hiking that would require you to wear pants and shorts, right? If you're working or you're building or you're doing things, right? But as a general rule, because society is so full on with anti-dresses, especially for women, and so very much like men need to wear dresses and skirts and all this weird stuff that's going on in our world, because of that, we do tend to put more emphasis on dresses and skirts. And so I do, as a mom, wear dresses and skirts more frequently than I used to, because in society, in the world that we live in now, it is looked down upon motherhood, homemaking, all things feminine for women is looked down upon. So I do try to put an emphasis on that. There's more of this kind of talk in those other videos if you want to look up those. But to sum up this video, because it's getting a little bit long, Christians all looking dowdy and seedy with their clothes the wrong cut and length, all looking the same. Somehow it doesn't seem to fit in with the flowers and all the rest of the amazing variety in God's creation. Flowers and sunsets, moon on water, and delicate grasses in the starlight. Would the designer of all of this dress his own children, created in his own image, in clothing which would make them unhappy and self-conscious? What would he have them all be alike and look alike when all the flowers don't look alike? What do you think? I think it's something that people need to ponder, and I think they need to ponder it more than they are. So that sums up the clothing chapter. Next week we will talk about integration is with the next chapter, and that is chapter 13. This entire book, guys, only has 14 chapters, so we are nearing the end very, very quickly. Just 2 more videos are left. Like I said, if you haven't already, pick up this book. It is available online, and if you haven't checked out the other videos in this series, they are linked below in the playlist called Hidden Art of Homemaking, so you can easily find it. Thanks for watching, guys.